So welcome. Thank you all for being here. And we are so excited to have our rescheduled time with Doug. Some technical issues on our end. So thanks again for being here. And we're still waiting for a few more participants to join us. But I am going to do a quick intro of Doug, who is brilliant. And we're just super excited to have him here. So Doug founded Hattaway Communications to help visionary leaders and organizations use strategy, science, and storytelling to achieve ambitious goals for people and the planet. Doug and I just did a really exciting recording together, and he is brilliant. We are going to be learning a lot about aspirational communication, which is an approach he pioneered and was featured in the Stanford Social Innovation Review as a cover story. Doug has worked in decades of experience at the highest levels of the US government, international organizations, NGOs, and the world's largest foundations. We are so lucky to have him here with us to be demonstrating, teaching us a bit about aspirational communication, his model. And we are recording this, so those of you who are not able to join us will be able to share it with our list. But Doug, I am going to pass it off to you to kind of kick it off and take it over.
Great, thanks so much. Hey everybody, enough about me. I'd like to hear from you all who are joining us today. If you could just put in the chat your name and where you're signing in from, and one sort of burning question or challenge that you're facing when it comes to communication. Let's take a minute and put that in the chat, if you will, and I'll get my eye candy set up and ready to go here.
All right, thank you.
So just a reminder, tell us where you're zooming in from and just a burning question that you have for Doug as we get set up and get ready to share.
All right, I'm still learning to work on two screens, so I can't see the chat anymore. So Celine, if you can call things out as people have questions or comments along the way.
Absolutely. I'll just share one quick burning question from Cindy from Winter Park, Florida. How to say more with less, using fewer words with the same power. And she's from ACES Matter. Hi, Cindy. Thanks for being here.
Oh, cool. Fun fact, Winter Park, Florida is the place of my birth. I was born in Winter Park Hospital around the time Disney World was built, if that'll date me a little bit.
Small world, small world.
Samuel from Buffalo, New York. Any burning questions or challenges, Samuel? You can ponder that while we get into it. What we're going to talk about today, sharing your story with authenticity. Interesting. Cool. The material we're going to go over today, we'll get into language and how to use words with maximum motivating power is the lingo we use. And also it's all about sharing stories. And I'm glad you used that word authentic, because we're really going to have the most impact through communication when the way we communicate is both authentic and strategic, right? It's true to the vision, the values of your organization and the goals you're trying to achieve, and it meets your audience where they are. That's what we mean by strategic. And look at Carly from California saying similarly, how to be effective, efficient, empathetic. Great. I think that's a really important word there too. Empathy, empathetic is used a lot in cognitive science. It refers to, there's a couple ways. One, intellectual empathy, where you can put yourself in the shoes of someone else and kind of understand their perspective, even if it's very different from your own. And another is emotional empathy, where we are able to sort of feel the emotions of others. And those are part of our toolkit as human beings to communicate and understand each other. And tapping into that for your strategic communication is very powerful. So awesome. You guys are already bringing up great topics that we can touch on as we go through this. As we've said, and as Celine introduced, this is called the art and science of aspirational communication. And there we go. To say a little bit more about me and more importantly, my team, we're strategists, researchers, and storytellers who work together to use, as Celine said, strategy, science. And from that, we mean data science, of course, but also the social sciences, cognitive psychology, motivational and social psychology, brain science. There's so much being learned now from the social sciences that give us, I think of it as inspiration, right? Insights from rigorous scientific experiments about how people think and what motivates them and how language works gives us ideas for words and images and stories and experiences to create for people. So we use that sort of toolkit to develop strategies of all kinds. It could be for narrative change or social movement building. It could be a brand building strategy for a nonprofit or a storytelling strategy, which I'll say more about. So we bring in strategic thinking from the worlds of, like, I come out of social movements and political advocacy, as well as branding and marketing, where a lot of money is spent to figure out marketing strategies, usually to part people with their money for junk they don't need, but there's a lot of insights there that we can use. Thanks for chiming in, Karen from Milwaukee, awesome town, telling a story without demonizing parents and making them wrong. So we'll talk about examples as we get into it and kind of brainstorm that with you. So we work with all kinds of organizations on all kinds of issues. So what we're going to do today is learn insights and ideas from the science side of strategic communication and outline an aspirational narrative. So hopefully within the next 53 minutes, you'll jot down some ideas about how to construct a new narrative about the work you do with inspiration from the science we're going to talk about. Hello, Bob in New York City, one of my favorite places. I'm glad you're with us. And feel free to chime in with questions or challenges as we go along here. So let's dive right into the science side of it, aspirational communication. And what I'm showing here is a conceptual framework, which is a term for visual like this, which represents ideas and a lot of information. And we use these visual tools a lot in our work because creating visuals like this helps people process complex ideas and information, which is a tip for you as well. Creating conceptual frameworks can really help you explain things to people. So this one represents a lot of ideas from cognitive, social, motivational psychology. What it says was to communicate with maximum motivating power, to get higher levels of interest and engagement, we need to connect with people at multiple levels. We need to speak to the heart and the head is kind of a shorthand for saying that. A lot of our clients it's all about the head and trying to explain everything to people. But we want to start at that highest level there, the aspirational level. And our aspirations are ideas about the kind of people we want to be, the kind of a community we want to live in, the kind of world we want to create. It's those aspirations that flow from our sort of deepest desires about the kind of life we want to have, kind of people we want to be, that really power our decisions and behaviors. So by definition, if you can connect your cause, whatever it is, to the authentic aspirations of your audience, you're going to be speaking to them in a very powerful way. The social element is important because we are social animals. We look to people we relate to, who we feel we can relate to, or who we admire, for cues about how to think about, a new topic we've never heard of, about what to buy, what TV shows to watch, that sort of thing. We look to for social cues to help us make decisions all the time. We're also inclined, if we're looking to, say, volunteer for a nonprofit organization, or we're asked to donate money or get involved in a cause, we often look to, well, who are the people who is involved in this cause? Is this like a party I want to be part of? Is it a team I want to join? Who's being helped by the programs? You need to think at multiple levels about how you put people in the picture and do that in a smart and strategic and authentic way. The emotional level is really important but often neglected. It's interesting because the cognitive psychology, which is a study of how we think, says that emotion works with cognition, feelings work with thinking, and to help us with attention and retention, remembering, and motivation. So our communications have to create emotional responses, or people aren't going to notice them with everything we're bombarded by all day long, much less remember them or be moved to act. And then finally, the functional level, that's where we explain what things do. What does my healthcare foundation do? What do our programs, how do they serve people? That sort of thing. And a lot of nonprofits spend a lot of time and effort there trying to explain the details of things. What the science says here is when we're trying to explain how things work, what an organization does, that sort of thing, the most important thing you can do is keep it simple. The interesting insight there is that people are kind of hardwired to preserve our mental energy because we use the same source of energy for all our mental, emotional, and physical activity. It's the glucose in our bloodstreams from a physiological standpoint. So the same thing that's fueling your morning workout is fueling your work day. And our brain is the #1 user of all that energy because it runs the whole show. So we are literally kind of designed to resist expending that mental energy. So what the science says is to get somebody to actually stop and think about what you're trying to explain to them, they have to be highly motivated, and it has to be really easy for them to do so. If you communicate in this way that we're describing here, they're going to be motivated. They're going to see their own aspirations, values, things reflected back at them. And then making it easy, there's a lot going into that. We'll talk about the language side of that later, but making it as simple as possible for people to understand complex and abstract ideas. So I'm going to give you a couple examples that bring these ideas to life. And let's just start with that big idea of aspirational thinking. This is me in middle school. Right down, I had the same rust-colored 3-piece suit, similar haircut, even same glasses. And think about that time of life. I know for me, my aspiration in life, and if you look at actually the studies of adolescence, are really driven by a desire to fit in, right? The social dynamic, to fit in with a group, to feel good about ourselves. And of course, the ultimate aspiration, interestingly, is identified from decades of research by MTV, the music channel, which focused on young people, was to be cool. So in my world of Westlake, middle school back in, this would have been the late 70s, I saw a social cue in my environment that helped me think about this. And it had to do with a consumer product, a pair of jeans. Now think about a pair of jeans functionally, at the functional level. Literally, what does a pair of jeans do? Or any pair of pants? If you think of it functionally, the only function is to cover the lower half of your body. You could do that with any number of products and spend pennies on it, but people will spend a lot of money on brand name jeans. So there's something going on there beyond the functional benefit of the product. Think to this example of Levi's, it was an aspirational thing to me because that is what the cool kids were wearing. So having that on my backside helped me feel like I fit in, made me feel better about myself, and in my mind, turned me from that to that. That's the power of aspirational thinking, even when it comes to products and things we buy. And that's an interesting insight from the world of behavioral economics and consumer behavior, is that kind of thinking drives our purchases much more than calculating costs and benefits. So take that idea of aspirational, and that concept I was just talking about there was aspirational identity. I had an idea. I wanted to be cool. And that was driving that particular behavior, right? Which led my mom then to take the last step in the process, which was to look at the price tag. Applying that to another topic, I'm going to talk about an issue that I worked on for about 15 years, starting in the state of Massachusetts, which was the first to allow same-sex couples to marry. I'd first sort of gotten involved in this issue in the mid-90s, working at a nonprofit called the Human Rights Campaign. And the Gallup organization had first polled the American public on that issue in 1996 and found that 27% of Americans supported legal recognition of same-sex marriages. Fast forward to 2018, and we were up to 67%. And that number has not gone down. We've gone down from about a quarter of the population to over 2/3. And millions of people changed their mind along the way to make that happen. And one key element of that, a lot went into achieving sort of a change in what's called a social norm like that. But this aspirational thinking was a key piece of it. So this is how the topic was framed, meaning how it was talked about by advocates at the beginning. It was a, quote, civil rights issue, meaning it had to do with equal protection under the Constitution, which says everybody in this country should have equal rights under the law, which of course is true. And that's the framing. And I use that term in a very specific way. The first thing you say about any topic will shape every perception and judgment that follows. So you have to be super strategic in the words you use to frame any topic, the words you use first and most frequently to talk about it. When the marriage equality movement was getting started and only 27% of people were agreeing, this is how they were talking about it. And what we found in researching this, both with same-sex couples, as well as with voters who were voting on this issue, they didn't really see marriage through the lens of legal rights and benefits. That's kind of functional thinking, right? Because what the question is whether the government is going to give a marriage license to somebody or not. That's literally what's happening. But that's not how people think about it. So we took it a new direction and we talked to people about their aspirations for marriage. And that was the question we asked. We didn't come at it from a political framework and say, okay, there's a debate on this topic. One side says this, the other side says this. Who do you agree with? That's how typically political polling works. We don't do that. We take the topic and we said, okay, when it comes to marriage, what are your aspirations? What do you hope for when you think about that? And what we found from talking to people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, some very common ideas that it's about love and family and ideally like a lifelong commitment. These are the aspirations people express when you talk about marriage and ask them about marriage. And guess what? Same-sex couples we interviewed said the exact same thing. Love, family, commitment. These are the big ideas. So we said, let's frame it in a new way and talk about love and commitment. So finding that insight, right? The big idea that where your audience is seeing their own aspirations reflected in the topic. And again, this is millions of people voting on same-sex marriage. So it's really not about them per se, but they are seeing an important ideas reflected. And that really was credited with changing the tide here. And what we want to do is find the best words to speak to those big ideas. And you can see right here, these are not fancy words. They're authentic and also strategic words, right? Because they meet the audience where they are and say it in words you can retain and repeat. And to show you how we then use the words, the message to frame storytelling. Because the science says that storytelling, sharing stories of real people in real situations or fictional stories of people in situations are the most powerful way to connect with people and to communicate complex ideas because we learned our language and our values and how the world works through stories. So we want to use the power of that and do it in a strategic way. So here's how we make it strategic storytelling. You start first by framing it. Remember, I said the first thing you say. So always have a headline that communicates the big idea you want people to take away from a story. And then a strategic story is an example of real people in a real situation who bring that idea to life. So the example I was showing you was from our campaign in Massachusetts, where we told the real authentic stories of couples who exemplified love and commitment. In this case, it was two women who had been together, I think it was over a decade, and stuck together after one of them got cancer. You can see in this image, the one on the right's in a wheelchair. And people see that, hear that story and see that, they recognize love and commitment in the picture. It's something you can respect and even admire. So that's a combination. Of course, visuals are as important, or some science says more important than the words. So you always want to use words and images together to get maximum impact. And the interesting thing about that in this case was changing the frame and starting with this idea of love and commitment really unleashed the power of a grassroots movement where people didn't quite know what to say. But when we said, just tell us your story about love and commitment, it powered all kinds of action, not just that advertising I showed you. So I'm going to recap some of the science for you, appeal to the authentic aspirations of your audience, help people see themselves in your cause, in this case, see values or aspirations that they share, speak to the heart and the head, like that story I just told you about people loving each other and sticking together through thick and thin, and keep it super simple. As you can see in this last case, we weren't trying to explain anything at all. The functional side did come into what does the law say, what does the Constitution say, stuff like that. But very few people needed to hear that. That was mostly lawmakers and lawyers needed to hear that stuff. So how do we communicate at all those levels? It sounds like a lot. Storytelling is the way to do it. And here's what some of the science says. It's natural to think in narratives because our minds make sense of situations of any topic by creating narratives about protagonists acting with intention to achieve outcomes. So that's a little wonky, but just go back to putting people in the picture. I'm going to show you an example of that on a topic I know some of you work in. But first, let me show you how to take that insight from the world of science and storytelling and use it for yourself. I got a question from Sylvia about earned media for that storytelling campaign. A quick story there. And I'm glad you asked that because the earned media, of course, was a big part of that campaign because this topic was being voted on. It was very controversial. So one example, we said, okay, love and commitment. Our storytelling strategy is to share stories of couples who really demonstrate that. So in Cambridge, Massachusetts was the first jurisdiction in the US to hand out a marriage license once the Supreme Court when the state Supreme Court allowed it. And we knew it was going to be covered around the country and in fact around the world. And my firm handled the media around all of that. So in that case, people were going to line up in front of City Hall when we made sure the first people in line to be the first ones to get a marriage license were a couple who had been together, like, I want to say 40 years. And sure enough, if you look up that story, and you might find my facts are off, but a couple that was together a long time, first couple to get their marriage license in Cambridge in the US, they were recruited strategically and asked to go camp out in front of City Hall, and they were happy to do it. It was authentic and real to them, and it told the story we wanted to tell. And that played out in 100 different ways. Thanks for asking that. So back to the narrative framework. We talked about the science and communicating at all this level. So how do I construct a story or even a set of messages drawing from this insight about how our brains think in narratives? Here's a narrative framework, a basic structure. The most basic sort of narrative framework is a relatable protagonist looking to achieve a meaningful goal and has to overcome obstacles, a villain, a challenge, right? That's kind of every story ever told. So how we adapt that for your use in the work you do is to think about the people you serve and the audience you're communicating with as the people who need to show up in your story. And what are their aspirations? What are their goals in life? If you start there, and I see people I relate to, values that reflect mine, aspirations and goals I respect or strive for myself, you got me, right? It's meaningful to me. So then you frame the problems that are addressed by your organization and the solutions you bring to it. And you keep that as simple as possible. That's about the size of it. People, goals, problems, solutions. What the cognitive science shows is that's called narrative coherence, that those ideas together help people wrap their head around the whole topic. And of course, ultimately, we're not communicating for the fun of it. Strategic communications is about achieving outcomes. So if you've got people's attention and you're speaking to the heart and the head, you want a call to action. You want to know what can they do to help the cause and ask them to do it. There's a lot of science behind all of this stuff. I'll show you as much as we can in the next 34 minutes. But we're going to walk through this framework, and you can take notes and ask questions as we go along. Okay, Zoom is now allowing me to see chat, so that's helpful. So please continue to put in questions, and I'll try to address those. There was one from earlier about telling a story without demonizing parents. And we can talk about that in a minute when we get to it, because I need to know more about the context of that. So as we get into this, I'll invite you to hop on and just ask your question. We can talk it through. That might come up where it sounds like in the work you're doing, parents might be in the problem category. So that's, I think, well, before I can address that on one level. Ultimately, and we've worked with, for example, we worked recently with a group that focuses on domestic violence, right? Violence in the home. And it was interesting how one of their guiding principles as we went through the work, okay, the topic is about child abuse and strengthening parenting. So it's similar to what we were talking about with the domestic violence, of course, included child abuse and partner abuse. And the advocates we were working on, who were passionate advocates and experts on this topic, one of their guiding principles was we don't demonize the person who you would think of as the perpetrator. We don't do that because we understand that this is behavior that's passed on through generations, and we need people to understand that. So a good rule of thumb for all of us is to separate the people from the problem, right? What is the problem there when you have parental abuse of a child, and helping people understand the roots of the problem, assuming that's what your organization is focused on, is a big part of how you do that, right? For example, in your case, you could tell the story of the parent and what happened to them as part of explaining why they're now part of the problem. You know what I mean? That's a really interesting one, because I had that experience with that group. It really opened my eyes to this, because the easy thing to do would have just been to make a villain out of the parent, right? So being very clear about your values and your understanding of the issue, and separating the person from the problem, and try to get at that, whatever you see as the causes of the problem that you're addressing. We'll talk about that a little later. Let me tell you a quick case study that applies this narrative framework to developing a brand. And I know a lot of you working at nonprofits are thinking about, how do I tell the story of my organization? This was about from the Harvard School of Public Health. Harvard is a well-known academic brand, of course, one of the most famous universities in the world. But the School of Public Health was launching a capital campaign in which they had to raise record sums of money. And they said, we have to communicate to people who don't know anything about public health. So the job was more about branding public health. And for a lot of you, that is the case, right? people are interested in your topic. How do I talk about the topic we work on, not just kind of promote my organization, right? So this is a good example of that. But of course, it's also about the organization and how do they uniquely, how's their mission uniquely contribute to this field that they're in. So you need to do both, of course. So that's what we aim to do. And it started with coming up, remember earlier we talked about framing, love and commitment, a one word you could use. A lot of my friends in brand strategy up in New York would call that the brand of the movement, right? This is the love movement. And that's just another term that's used for, it's used in a lot of ways, but what are the big ideas we want to communicate? So we do our research to determine that. And what we came up with was this sort of formula or framework for the School of Public Health, which spoke to three big ideas about what they do that are aspirational, meaning they were important to everybody involved in the school, the students, the faculty, and importantly, people who donated to the school. They educate global leaders. That's actually a function of the school, of course, is education. The aspiration is that their students go on to be recognized around the world. They conduct research. That's a function of their research program, obviously. The aspirational ideas, they produce powerful ideas, right, that get put to use out in the world. And the reason they're all there is to transform lives. People in public health don't think small. They think at the population level, right? Versus like the medical profession, you're often focused on like an individual patient. So, and that translated to a tagline, powerful ideas for a healthier world. But back to that big idea, these reflected the aspirations of everybody involved with the school, including donors who wanted to support education and research and impact, right? So it's reflecting everybody's aspirations. And then we created the narrative framework to simplify what is actually a rather complicated topic. Global leaders in public health, and we put people in the picture by describing it as a group of experts in diseases and environmental pollution, in public safety, and all kinds of topics who work together as a team. So anytime you've got a complex topic or something like that, think about putting people in the picture and describing what people are doing. That's the easiest way for people to understand anything, according to cognitive research. Their goal to transform lives of people everywhere. And what do? What's the problem? They work as a team to tackle complex public health challenges. And we weren't trying to explain all the challenges. We were just saying they're complicated, right? And you need a smart team of people to figure it out. And again, they're producing powerful ideas through research, innovation, and education. So very simple ideas to frame a story that is coherent in the mind of the audience. And then we turn it into, if you're, have background in marketing, the idea of a value proposition. What do you say in a sentence or so that explains the unique value delivered to the world by your organization? So we produce that along with a 1-minute message. And a promise we make is we can help you explain just about anything in just about a minute. So that looks like this. Here's a value proposition, 1 sentence. Harvard School of Public Health brings together dedicated experts from every discipline to educate new generations of global health leaders and produce powerful ideas that can transform the lives of people everywhere. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's basically a little narrative right there, right? That's a narrative framework. And then it goes on to put more flesh on the bones. Some might call this an elevator pitch, right? It's something you can say in less than a minute. Our standard is based on studies that show the average linguistic analysis that shows the average American English speaker speaks about 150 words in a minute. So my family's from the South, so it's a lot less than that. Our friends in New York could probably pack in a couple hundred words in a minute, but it's kind of it's a rule of thumb that helps us. If you're at 150 words, you're around a minute of spoken. And that's the other thing too. We want to create content messages that people can retain and repeat, because one, that sort of as writers and content creators, it drives us to be simple, to make things simpler and easier to say. It also gets the word of mouth power going, which is still the most effective form of communication. And what you see here is that that little message is touching on every level. I'm not going to sort of pick it apart for you in the time we have, but it's kind of doing everything that we need to do in about a minute. And then to go on to the storytelling, here's back to how we defined a strategic story, a specific person in a specific situation or people who exemplify those ideas. So this is a story about a faculty member named Richard Cash, credited with saving millions of lives with a simple concept, oral rehydration therapy, which is explained right there in very simple terms, who got global recognition, right? That's an authentic story that strategically communicates the three big ideas we wanted to communicate. So every story we tell, every example touches on at least one of these ideas. So when you have a framework and you do it like that, everything you communicate is going to continue reinforcing the big idea. And that's called building a brand, right? That's called driving a narrative in different ways, in different fields. Of course, we want proof points, which can be facts and figures, examples, anything that supports the ideas that we want to convey. And that's part of speaking to the head as well as the heart, of course. But the thing with this is you want to be strategic with statistics, just like stories, right? Pick the ones that really represent the idea you need to communicate. And I'll challenge you to pick the best one. Like, what's the one data point that really opens people's eyes to your topic in a meaningful way? Because one thing that's very typically done is overwhelming people with too much information and too many ideas at once. So be super selective and super strategic when you want to share facts with people. It's better for them to remember one meaningful one than to forget, 10, that aren't really that meaningful, because that's what's going to happen. So the fun punchline for this campaign is that this school really did a great job. They are a lot of smart communicators of using sort of this toolkit to communicate through events and everything they did. And they said it really did help them achieve a record-breaking result for a capital campaign. So I use that example to show you, how to apply a narrative framework and these other sort of tools for your toolkit, right? If you've got this stuff, particularly starting with that framework, and then everything works together to communicate the big ideas about your topic, you're really going to be well equipped to achieve impact with communication. Let me stop there and ask for questions, because I know that was a lot. And Cindy, thanks for the comment. I saw about your last comment that was exactly what you needed to hear. I'm glad that was helpful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
What other questions or comments do folks have so far? Any other questions?
I'm trying to wrap. I have one, and again, this is Cindy. I'm trying to wrap my head around it, because I'm talking about childhood abuse in a sense, but more on a macro level. So similar to the Harvard setup, I don't want to put ourselves on the same plane as Harvard, but I'm trying to take macro topics like the ACE study, and I want to make it make sense to micro influencers, so that those micro influencers can then take that same topic back into their zip codes to start educating people about it. I guess what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it is that ACEs are perpetrated by humans against other humans. So it almost feels like there's a lot of us that are the antagonists. But the problem I want to solve is that a lot of us are doing it unknowingly. Like, we don't know when we tell a kid, you remind me of your dad and I really can't stand you. We don't know that that's causing physiological changes in their body when a mom says this. So I want to fix the problem of the people who are passing ACEs down unknowingly. I'm not talking about the big spectrum of, obvious child abuse, but just those of us who are doing it unknowingly.
Yep, got it. That's really good. And it's very helpful way to frame it as we go in, because I'm going to work through how to outline a narrative on your topic. And you've already hit on, and I think the challenge is, what are the winning words to frame in a simple way that they don't know, right? The problem is, what I understood you to say, they're passing on, and that's another way to talk about passing on abuse without even realizing it, right?
That's correct.
That's the big idea. That's the way to talk about the problem that you're addressing in simple terms. Let's think about it more. We can brainstorm it. And then that, of course, the solution. And what we want with the solution is that it's easy to understand, right? So what I assume from hearing what you just said is that what you're part of anyway, an important part of what you do is open their eyes to what's going on so that they can stop. Is that right?
That is really good. Yes.
This is Karen. I have a question in terms of, we do the same thing with the Parenting Network. We educate parents with the kinds of information based in science that is successful for good parenthood. But the idea of good is not, we don't use the word good parenthood, because a lot of parents say, don't tell me how to parent my child. So there's stigma around parenting, because any criticism is going to be a personal attack, or they feel it. So we do a strength-based of 5 protective factors and those kinds of things, but we still find there's so much stigma when we're doing environmental kinds of strategies, when we're, how do you take it and put it on a bus stop, put it on a bus, how do you do a billboard? It's the giant, non-stigmatizing messaging that I think is really important, but we're not quite sure how to get there.
Yeah. A thought that comes to mind, and it's from this aspirational approach, right? Because I totally hear you with people feeling stigmatized or criticized when it's a negative, right? When they're being told how to parent. If you bring the aspirational thinking to it, what are people's aspirations, right, around parenting? Again, shared aspirations. That doesn't mean it's everybody, but a common aspiration that you can tap into. Even, the parents who might be in crisis or having all the challenges, and maybe good isn't the right word, but you're offering, what I hear is that you're offering useful insights, ideas, tips for powerful parenting, right? To be the best parent you can be, maybe thinking of it that way, like what you're offering is a chance for them to learn, right? To learn and grow. These are ways to think through that aspirational lens or a strength-based lens, also called a growth mindset when communicating with people, because that is part of the insights which are interesting to me about the brain and mind and personality, is that people do have the capacity and usually the desire to grow and learn throughout their life. So you can tap into what is a shared, even if people feel harried and stressed and not capable always of doing that, that is a powerful thing you might be able to tap into. And the way I was just sort of thinking and talking about it is strengths-based or asset-based. Getting people interested in learning how to do something that they deep down want to do, And it is really interesting, particularly in this field that both of you are talking about, that we do emphasize the positive, right? When it comes to a lot of problems in society, guess what? People know about the problems. We hear the problems all day long. To be the ones who show up with a solution is powerful, right? And to start and to be solutions oriented. I have a podcast on my podcast called an interview on my podcast, which is called Achieve Great Things. And there's a whole interview we did on the topic of the power of positivity in communication. That might be interesting, have food for thought for you. Samuel said his agency is trying to build stories around people with mental health and addiction. Want to use digital storytelling and gain an investment from grant funding. Yes, totally understand that. and that you may not be explaining the project the best. As you know, when it comes down to grants, you have to think about the funder and what are their particular interests. Most of them are after impact, to see that what you do has an effect in the world. One of the challenges that we face is that lots of time impact is defined as big numbers, right? Like impact equals, we helped 1 million people sort of thing, and you probably don't have numbers like that. Remember, the power of a story of transformation of one person is more powerful than a number, right? And that is proven time and time again with experts who think and say that they make decisions based on data, but they are as influenced by anecdotes as everybody else. So you want to pair stories with statistics. And also another idea for you, if we haven't served 1 million people yet, we want to, that's in the future. Well, get them to invest in the goal, right? That's called aspirational thinking, aspirational investment. And there is indications that some are going to be more inclined to give money on past performance, right? Okay, you've got a proven model. I see you've done it. Here's some money, right? And or future potential. So you might want to lean more into the future potential. I'm assuming the work you do does bear fruit, and you can tell the stories of how it's transforming people and families. So you start with a story framed with the big idea, and then get the funder excited about the potential to bring it forward in some way. Lots of times they're looking at, how do I break new ground? How do I, bring something new to the world? So I don't know the funders you're looking at, but those are common themes that come up in having worked with lots of funders and nonprofits over the years. I'm actually going to put in the chat a link you can go to. This is an organization called the Communications Network, also ComNet, which is a professional organization for people like you. People do communications work for nonprofits and social enterprises and so forth. And they have a page on their website, which we built for them, called Storytelling for Good. And so just look up Communications Network, Storytelling for Good. And it essentially walks through everything we're walking through today, but it's got 4 modules, and you can fill out little worksheets that help you think through different aspects of it. I'm going to run through a sample of those right now in our remaining time to give you an opportunity to think through some of these things, but also to thank Celine, it's right there. This will give you a little taste of what's there as well, because there you can take some more time and really work through it. So this is going around that narrative framework to brainstorm an aspirational narrative, if you remember that. So we're going to go people, goal, problem, solution. And I'll give you a little bit of time, a little bit of science under each, but the big ideas are put people in the picture, reflect the aspirations of your audience, define the causes and consequences. That's what we were just talking about. Like the idea of child abuse. What is that cause that we're working on? And show the solutions that you bring to it and its benefits. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So looking at people real quick, help people see themselves in your narrative, as we have said. So when you're writing about being a parent or having good mental health, right? Those are aspirations that people can easily see themselves in. So think of your stakeholders. This is a thought exercise, something you can make some notes. Remember when we were talking about marriage equality and we found that same-sex couples and everybody else we talked about marriage had similar ideas about it? So think of it that way. Take your topic, think about the people your programs work with, the partners you work with, whatever it is. People want to support your work. What are they like as people? When it comes to your topic, what do they care about? What are their aspirations? It's just simple adjectives, nouns too. Who are they? What do they do? Just helping you think in a very human way about who are the people. Like back to the public health example, we pictured the environmental scientists and the immunologists and the other people who were involved in that. And we just told their story. So that's a good place to start. Just think of them as people and write down words that come to mind. Goals. The worksheets on that website go into a little more. I'm just giving you a taste of things, little simple exercises. Because the words that come to mind for you are likely to also come to mind for your audience. And then you start to imbue your communication with very human words. Here's the idea about goals. And this is an example from our work with a group called CARE, which works in, they started in Africa and they work all over the world. A humanitarian organization that is often responding to crises, like this is from a famine. And when they are putting out appeals to raise money around a crisis, people respond. And they're very effective at telling stories like this family in need. And then when the crisis is over or falls out of the headline, their donations fall back down again. But CARE doesn't just do crisis. They have programs in education and health and financial security and so forth. So they asked us to help them communicate in an aspirational way about their programs. So it's not that they're not doing the crisis communication, they're also doing the aspirational communication. And this is a story in 2 sentences. They started with a handful of pennies, now they're entrepreneurs. And that is a story of a microfinance program, which literally does that. And you can see like, wow, that's cool. I want to support that kind of work. And when you start telling stories, you see the power of a handful of pennies in the hands of a woman in a village in Africa. That can really make a lot of impact on people's lives. So think about the aspirations again. When it comes to your topic, what are the aspirations when it comes to mental health and parenting, health in general, that sort of thing? Think high. As well as, again, there was sort of the survival aspect of it. We aspire, depending on, our life situation. Some of us are striving just to survive or to feel a sense of security. Whereas when we feel that our needs are met, then we're aspiring to achievement and success, to be the best we can be, that sort of thing. So there's a lot behind that, but just think at multiple levels about it. Now, problems. We were talking about this before, so I think this will be helpful. We already said, separate the people from the problems, and that's one good way this framework can help you. A lot of times when people are using negative adjectives to describe people, like at-risk youth, abusive parent, things like that, you're creating negative associations with the people that you're communicating about and serving. That doesn't help. You want to focus on the positive when you're talking about people, their aspirations, their values, their strengths. Then talk about the problem and how that keeps them from being a good parent or keeps them from having mental health, that sort of thing. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb. And here's some of the science. To feel motivated to act about, to address a problem, obviously people need to be aware of it. They also have to care about it, and putting people in the picture in the way we're talking about and aspirations is going to do that. And they have to believe change is possible, right? Now, the stories you tell about your programs helping people, that's going to do that. It gives them a reason to believe change is possible. The other is keeping it simple, right? If they can wrap their head around how it works and so forth, they're more likely to believe that things are possible. What you want to avoid doing is overwhelming people with the complexity of the problems, right? So any of these problems that you're addressing are intergenerational, right? Child abuse, for example, or intergenerational poverty is an issue we've worked on. There's a lot of complexity around how systems have failed people and that sort of thing. Your typical audience member doesn't need to understand all that. They need to understand the big ideas about what you do to address that complexity. So really focus on what you are doing. And don't worry about trying to explain everything to everybody. So here's some examples. This is from a different kind of organization, a social enterprise, a business with a mission of creating sustainable products in partnership with indigenous communities in the Amazon rainforest. And this is the problem, they said. The Amazon is being destroyed for unsustainable uses that threaten the health of the planet and the livelihoods of the indigenous people living in the rainforest. They have immense knowledge about the value to be found in sustainable rainforest projects, but they aren't connected to markets where they can sell them. So obviously this is a business approach to solving a problem. So we see Amazon is being destroyed. Guess what? most of our environmental donors, they know that, right? They don't need more about that. It's really the aspect of it that you are focusing on. In this case, and the consequences. How does the problem affect people and the planet? That's the other part of obviously making people care about it. And then getting at the cause that you are focused on. In this case, they aren't connected. So even though they have great things like RUNA is a beverage, we called it clean energy from the Amazon. You can find it online. It's made from a leaf from the Amazon. And it has creating that and bottling it has sent money back to use for indigenous communities to preserve the rainforest. So consider a key problem addressed in your work, or sort of the heart of the problem. What's the cause? What are the consequences? That's how I can understand it and care about it. And we've already talked about some of that. That was really helpful to hear about sort of the cause behind parents abusing kids without realizing it, passing on abuse without knowing they were doing it. That's a cause I can wrap my head around and see how you might be addressing it. And that, of course, is the trick with the solutions. You want to create, when I said that, so you're opening the parents' eyes to what they're doing. It's just a simple little connection that I was able to make without being an expert on the topic. That's what you want to go for. It's as simple as that, at least to frame the solution. Your programs might be much more detailed and based on a lot of science, but we're talking about the framing. How do you start the conversation? What's the first thing you say about it? So that's one thing we often tell the scientists and the policy experts and the others is all we're doing here is framing it in a way that helps you explain it. Don't try to explain it from the get-go. Start here. So we want to state specific to solutions to the problem and show how they benefit individuals and society. That's maximum motivation. If I can see the parent and the child who are being served, that's touching the heart. I want to help people like that. That's great. But if it can also say, and it helps society in any number of ways, that's extra motivation, right? So think about both things, benefits to individuals and society. So here's how that looked like with RUNA. We said that the problem is the indigenous communities aren't connected to markets where they can sell sustainable products. So RUNA builds supply chains connecting remote rainforest communities to customers across the US. And that is, they were mostly raising money from government foundations, but also business, the corporate, social responsibility programs and so forth. So they're using the, supply chains is a term that would be understood by people in that who are doing economic development work. But notice how simple that is. They aren't connected. We build the supply chain. There's a lot that goes on to building a supply chain to take a leaf from a tree in the forest to a bottled beverage in a gym refrigerator in New York City. There's a lot behind that. But this is just setting that up so that people can understand the big idea before you explain everything to them. So that's an example. So again, thinking about the solution to the problem you're highlighting, again, picking a big idea about the problem that you can frame it with, rather than getting too deep into technical details. So again, that link that Celine put in the chat will take you to that. To do, ask more detailed questions. Here's our benefits to consumers, producers, and the planet. Our supply chain connects Amazonian farmers to customers in the US, bringing a source of clean energy to health-conscious consumers, which, by the way, if we didn't do that, there would be no enterprise, there would be no money going to the Amazon. What is the benefit to the people buying the product? Returning income to indigenous communities, preserving millions of acres of rainforest. So in one sentence, benefits to people, planet, society. So all that is, that little message about RUNA, you could say in less than a minute. And that's what they did to get people to lean in and want to learn more. That's about the size of it. So I mentioned the podcast. We have a blog and podcast, which you could access through our website, hattaway.com, or just search Achieve Great Things Podcast. It's on Apple and other places you get your podcasts. or articles. If you're like me and actually prefer to read things, we have a blog with the podcast and articles transcribed. And this article on the topic of aspirational communication, which Celine mentioned at the opening, you can get at ssir.org or at our website under About, and it's free to you there. So I will stop there and stop sharing my screen and see if folks have any last questions you want to address. Or did I time it so perfectly?
Doug, you were perfect timing, and I know we're at the top of the hour. So this recording will go out to everybody. I'll make sure that I link to those resources and that we connect you with Doug. But I just wanted to, from us at Memory Facts, just give you a huge thank you, Doug, for being so generous with your time and brilliance in being here. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the great work you do, and thanks for joining us today. I hope you find it useful.
Thanks, everyone.